Welcome back to the deep dive. This is where we take all the noise, the research, the news, the expert analysis, and distill it down into the focused knowledge you really need.
Today we're looking at something that, well, it gets to a fundamental paradox in modern tech. We see these giants, these AI leaders like OpenAI, and we think of them as these impregnable digital fortresses.
Right. Unbreachable.
Exactly. Their security budgets are massive, their tech is on the cutting edge. But this incident, it really proves that the biggest threats, they often don't come from a super sophisticated attack on the core tech. They come from the simplest, weakest links in their supply chain.
That's it, exactly. We are zeroing in on the major security incident that didn't hit the ChatGPT model itself, but one of the third-party services OpenAI was relying on, the analytics platform, Mixpanel. And it's such a crucial case study because it shows that even the pioneers of AI are, well, they're completely exposed when one of their vendors gets taken down by simple social engineering.
And this is so much more than just another data breach story. I mean, you have to see this as a mandatory lesson in modern vendor risk management. The Mixpanel breach and what it meant for OpenAI's customers, it just demonstrates that the security of an entire AI platform is only as strong as, say, the least protected employee at the most peripheral analytics vendor they happen to use.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is a bit complex. We need to understand the exact mechanics of this attack, this fascinating sort of low-tech method used against a very high-tech company.
Yeah.
And we have to clarify precisely who was affected. This distinction is so important. Are we talking about everyday ChatGPT users, or are we talking about API users?
It's a critical difference.
Then we'll get into the data that was exposed.
Yeah.
It's described as limited, but surprisingly potent. And most importantly, we have to draw out the really profound and frankly uncomfortable lessons this teaches us about the supply chain risk that, now just completely dominates the AI ecosystem.
Right. And it's important to frame this correctly. This was not a failure of OpenAI's core model security. It's a textbook example of a much broader systemic challenge. It just shows how modern AI infrastructure relies on this incredibly complex, sometimes unregulated network of third-party vendors for everything from data telemetry to user analysis.
And what really stands out to me is the attack vector itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about some brilliant cryptographic flaw or an advanced infiltration.
No, not at all. It came down to a simple human-based vulnerability. The significance here is really twofold. First, it's how the attacker got in through a common social engineering attack we call smishing.
Right.
And second, it's the incredible analytical power that can be pulled from what seems like limited metadata. Attackers aren't always after the core data anymore. They're using metadata to build these incredibly credible launch pads for much bigger, higher impact attacks down the line.
Okay, so let's start with the setup, the timeline, the players involved. The central company here that isn't OpenAI is Mixpanel. Now, Mixpanel is a well-established product analytics platform. They've been around since 2009, long before this whole AI boom. OpenAI was using them for essential web analytics, specifically tracking usage on the front end for their API product.
Right, so that's platform.openai.com, the developer portal.
Exactly, the main hub for developers.
And to really get the vulnerability here, you have to understand Mixpanel's role in the architecture. It wasn't doing any of the heavy lifting for the AI, It wasn't processing prompts or generating outputs. Its job was purely observational.
Just watching.
Just watching. Gathering telemetry data. It was analyzing how customers moved through the API docs, where they clicked, what features they looked at, and maybe more importantly, where they dropped off during sign-up. This is the kind of data that helps OpenAI make really crucial product decisions.
So they're essentially the security camera at the front door of the API services, watching all the customer behavior. But that brings up a huge question. Why did that service need access to personally identifiable information, PII? Why not just use an anonymized user ID?
And that is the absolute critical technical colon that this whole breach hinges on. Mixpanel, like most sophisticated analytics tools, it uses a JavaScript SDK that's embedded directly into the platform.openai.com website.
Okay.
And to track a user's journey accurately, let's say you start on the pricing page, you leave, you come back a week later, and then you finally set up a billing profile to connect all those dots. The tool needs to identify you consistently across all those sessions.
Across different devices, different times.
Exactly. And the easiest way to do that, to guarantee that cross-session identification, is to use a unique, unchanging identifier.
Which is usually an email address or a name.
Precisely. Now, some companies might pass an anonymized, randomly generated ID. But many others, especially if they're focused on growth and customer success, will deliberately pass PII, like the user's name and email, right to the analytics platform.
Why? What's the benefit for them?
It allows their product teams to run these hyper-specific analyses. For instance, they can correlate revenue, which they know from their internal systems, with specific usage behaviors that are tracked by Mixpanel. And the email address is the universal key that links those two data sets. It's great for business intelligence, but it exponentially increases the security risk if that vendor gets breached.
So the data leak wasn't an accident. It was actually a calculated business decision that was baked right into the product architecture.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, so now let's look at the timeline of the breach itself. There are some interesting gaps here.
There are. So Mixpanel first detected the unauthorized access on November 8th, 2025. They secured the immediate vulnerability and, started their response protocols.
And they told OpenAI pretty quickly.
Very quickly. OpenAI was notified the very next day, November 9th, that Mixpanel was investigating a potential security incident.
That sounds pretty proactive on Mixpanel's part, telling their clients right away.
Yeah, it does. But here's where that transparency timeline gets a little murky. Mixpanel then spent the next 2 weeks doing detailed forensics, trying to figure out exactly what data was accessed, who took it, and how.
Right.
It wasn't until November 25th, a full 17 days later, that Mixpanel finished its review and finally shared the confirmed list of affected API users and the specific data with OpenAI.
17 days.
Yeah. And that delay, while I'm sure it was frustrating, it does highlight how complex breach forensics can be. You can't really notify people until you know for sure what was taken.
But for the end users, those API developers, that's 3 weeks of being completely in the dark. They're potentially exposed while their data custodian, OpenAI, and the vendor, Mixpanel, are trying to figure things out internally.
It creates a major transparency gap, absolutely. And the thing that triggered this whole cascade wasn't some state-sponsored actor with a zero-day exploit, which is what I think a lot of people imagine.
No.
It was a failure of basic human operational security. Mixpanel reported that the incident started from a smishing campaign.
Smishing. The combination of SMS and phishing. For anyone listening, can you break down why this specific vector is just so effective right now?
It's effective because it completely bypasses our normal defenses and leverages the trust we have in our phones. Emails, we're all skeptical of them. They go through spam filters. But a text message feels direct, it feels personal, and it feels urgent. So it's basically a fraudulent text message designed to trick an employee, in this case, a Mixpanel employee, into clicking a malicious link or giving up their login credentials, or even bypassing their multi-factor authentication.
And it often works because it looks like a legitimate message from inside the company, right?
Precisely. The attacker doesn't need to be a brilliant coder. They just need to be a good psychologist. They might send a text pretending to be from the IT help desk, warning about a security threat to the employee's account and telling them they need to verify their password on a fake site.
Or a fake payroll notification or something.
Exactly. A new VPN policy that requires an immediate login. And because the employee is probably using their phone for work anyway, the text message slips right past all the corporate email defenses. It goes straight to the human.
And the numbers on this are terrifying.
Huh.
This isn't just a few incidents here and there.
Not at all. There was an October report on mobile threats that was just stark. It said that smishing accounted for a staggering 39% of all detected mobile threats in 2024.
Wow.
So it's a dominant, high-volume, and very successful attack method because it targets the most predictable vulnerability we have: human trust and urgency. The attacker exploited a human at the vendor, and in doing so, they bypass all the expensive hardware and software firewalls.
It's really humbling when you think about it, that a multi-billion-dollar AI ecosystem can be compromised because of one fraudulent text message sent to one person at a third-party analytics company.
It really speaks volumes about where companies need to focus their security training and their budgets. It's not just about securing the code anymore. It's about securing the entire perimeter of your vendor network and making sure every single partner employee has robust security training.
Now, a quick question on that. Mixpanel is an established player. Do we know if they had industry-standard security certifications, like a SOC 2? And if they did, what does this say about those standards?
That's a great question. It's highly, highly probable that a company of Mixpanel size serving clients like OpenAI does maintain certifications like SOC 2 Type 2. That's really the gold standard for service organizations managing client data. It validates their controls for security, privacy, confidentiality, and so on.
So if they were compliant, What does that compliance even mean if this can still happen?
It means they have documented controls in place, they have annual audits, they have formal access policies, they have incident response plans on paper. But here's the crucial caveat. SOC2 doesn't test for human failure under the pressure of social engineering. It tests systems and documentation. This incident proves that even the most robust certified systems are basically useless if an employee gets tricked by a smishing attack into handing over the keys to the kingdom.
So it really challenges the whole industry to demand more than just a certificate.
Exactly. It challenges the AI industry to demand not just compliance, but demonstrable real-world resilience against social engineering, especially for any vendor employee who has access to customer PII.
It also brings up that principle of least privilege again. Why give the PII to the analytics vendor in the first place?
Precisely. The only silver lining here is that the breach was limited to Mixpanel systems and it did not involve unauthorized access to OpenAI's core infrastructure. But the fundamental question is still there. Why did OpenAI let this data sit on a peripheral service at all? It really gets to your point. The vulnerability wasn't in the AI engine itself, but in the analytics tool that was watching the traffic go by.
Okay, we've got the mechanics down. Now let's move to the most pressing question for anyone listening. The data. When you hear OpenAI breach, the immediate fear is, oh my God, was my proprietary chat history exposed, my confidential business prompts, my code? We have to address that fear head on. Was my sensitive information compromised?
And the first step in addressing that is with some powerful reassurance, and it's based on the confirmed scope of the breach. The architectural design that separated the core data from the analytics data, that was really the saving grace here.
So let's talk about the good news first. What was confirmed, not exposed?
Critically, all the core conversational and usage data was completely secure. That includes, and this is important, absolutely no chat content, no user prompts, no AI-generated outputs, and no underlying API requests or usage data.
That's a massive relief for any business using the API for sensitive work.
It is. And beyond that, the key security and financial data was also safe. So no passwords, no account credentials, no sensitive API keys, no payment details, no government IDs, and no session or authentication tokens. None of that was ever shared with Mixpanel, so it couldn't be compromised.
That distinction about the API keys is so important for developers and companies who run their services on top of OpenAI.
Absolutely. But we do have to hammer home that other distinction about who is affected. If you are just a general user, someone who uses the ChatGPT chatbot on OpenAI's website or mobile app for everyday questions,
You're fine.
you were not impacted by this breach at all. The breach was solely limited to analytics information collected from users on the developer platform interface. That's platform.openai.com.
So it really narrows the scope down to developers, to administrators, to organizations who are integrating GPT through the API.
That's the group.
Okay, now let's drill down into the data that was exposed. It's been called limited but potent. We know it wasn't passwords, but why is this data still considered such a significant risk?
Because it's basically a treasure trove of identity confirmation. And that is the fuel you need for advanced social engineering. The attacker didn't get the keys to the vault, but they got the complete identity profile of the people who own the keys. We've identified about 6 categories of exposed data.
Right, let's go through them.
The first 2 are the most basic, but they're also the most powerful. The name provided on the API account and the email address associated with that account.
Right there, you have identity and a direct line of communication for an attacker.
Instantly. Then, category 3 is location. The approximate course location, so city, state, or country, that was derived from the user's browser IP address.
That sounds less sensitive on its own, but I can see how it can be useful.
It adds a critical layer of personalization. An attacker can send a fake security notice that says it only affects users in San Francisco or London, which makes the message way more believable to someone who actually lives there.
And then it gets more technical, right?
Yeah.
What about the device details?
That's category 4. Technical details like the operating system and the browser the person used to access the API platform. This helps the attacker tailor their payload. If they know you're on a Mac using Chrome, they can design a malicious link that's disguised as a Chrome update or a macOS security patch.
Which dramatically increases the chance someone will click it.
For sure. And the 5th category is referring websites. So where the user came from. Was it a link on a specific GitHub page, a programming forum, maybe a post on LinkedIn?
And how does that help an attacker?
It gives them context about the user's professional life, their interests. If they see you came from a specific corporate software development blog, they can craft a spear phishing email that pretends to be about a security issue with that specific blog. It's all about building trust through hyper-specificity.
And finally, the sixth element, which you mentioned, was crucial: the organization, or user IDs. Why is connecting an email to an organization ID so powerful?
This is maybe the most sensitive piece of metadata that was exposed. An email address can be generic, but when you link that email to a specific organization ID inside the OpenAI platform, you confirm two critical facts. One, this person is a legitimate paying customer or an administrator of a high-value service.
Okay.
And two, the attacker now has the specific internal identifier that OpenAI uses for that organization. So they can use that ID in their phishing email saying, "We detected an issue with your account linked to organization ID number 123456. That little detail, it just transforms a generic spam email into what looks like an authoritative official communication. It completely bypasses your skepticism.
This limited but potent data set, it absolutely explains the frustration we saw all over social media. I mean, a lot of users, especially hobbyists or small developers, they felt completely betrayed. They expected their name and email to stay safe inside OpenAI's environment, not passed along to some third-party analytics company.
And that frustration is 100% justified. It gets to the core dilemma of modern digital privacy. I saw one user who wrote, "I'm not happy. Why did they need to pass on my name and email to Mixpanel? I'm just trying to make small personal experiments."
Yeah.
The expectation is that privacy is the default. The reality is that pervasive data sharing is the default, all for the purpose of optimizing the product funnel.
Which brings us to the really thorny issue of consent and the legal defense. Did OpenAI actually violate its own privacy promises by sharing this PII with Mixpanel?
Legally speaking, probably not. OpenAI, virtually every major tech company, is protected by their privacy policy and their terms of service. The things we all scroll past and click, "I agree" on.
Right.
OpenAI's policy explicitly states they can provide personal information to vendors and service providers to assist them in meeting business operations needs.
And since product analytics falls under business operations needs, they're technically covered.
Exactly. The user, by accepting the terms, has legally consented to their data being shared with a wide and often unlisted network of third-party vendors. The issue isn't really about legality, it's about the expectation of privacy and the lack of any true informed consent. Do people really understand that when they sign up for a developer portal, their name and email are immediately being sent across APIs to analytics and marketing partners? I don't think they do.
The moment you check that box, you're basically consenting to this recursive chain of data sharing that you have absolutely no visibility into and no control over.
That is the reality that this incident just lays bare. It highlights this huge asymmetry of power. The company benefits from getting this granular user-level data.
It lets them growth hack and improve the customer journey.
Right. And the user accepts the hidden cost, which is this dramatically increased exposure if any one of those peripheral partners fails their security protocols. This incident is a stark, real-world example of the privacy cost of just clicking agree.
And the data is immediately atomized and distributed across this sprawling ecosystem of vendors.
And that atomization is the problem, because if just one of those vendors is compromised by a basic smishing attack, the data is gone. The fact that the PII was not only collected but then shared in the first place, that's the real point of failure here.
Okay, let's shift focus to the real-world impact of this exposed metadata. If I'm an API user, and now an attacker has my name, my email, my organization ID, my location, how did that actually translate into a concrete threat? What's the next phase of the attack look like?
Well, we've moved so far beyond simple spam. The real danger now is the creation of these hyper-specific, highly credible, and ultimately devastating targeted attacks. We're talking spear phishing and social engineering campaigns that are designed specifically to overcome your natural suspicion.
Let's walk through a concrete scenario.
Yeah.
Use those 6 compromised data fields to show how it would work.
Okay. Imagine the attacker uses the email address they stole, they craft a message, and the subject line is something like, "Urgent. Mixpanel security alert action required for organization ID tag 123456 in city state."
Wow. Okay, that immediately grabs your attention. It's referencing your specific organization ID, which confirms they know you're an OpenAI API user, and it's using your exact location.
Precisely. The body of that fake email might then say something like, "Due to the recent breach, all users who use the API on the specific operating system they know you use.
Your Linux system was flagged in the breach logs.
Exactly. Must revalidate their API keys through a temporary portal. The email would look professional. It might even use a spoofed sender address or a corporate logo. The goal isn't to steal your Mixpanel password. The goal is to steal your OpenAI API keys or the admin credentials to your core OpenAI account, or worse, your entire corporate network.
So the data they stole is used purely as a stepping stone. It's just there to bypass your initial security filters, both the technological ones and the psychological ones. It gives the attacker a crucial point of leverage.
That's the new calculus of cybercrime, exactly. As David Schwed from Sovereign AI put it, even limited metadata can be dangerous in the wrong hands. This data is the raw material for building credibility and trust, which is really the soft underbelly of all security. Once an attacker has your user ID and your organization name, they can move on to attacking your other accounts, your bank, your social media, your GitHub profile.
And this brings us right to the core systemic problem here, the fragility of what Schwed called the recursive supply chain in the age of AI. Can you break down what that term means in this context?
Yeah, the term recursive supply chain implies this dependence that goes down in multiple layers, and each layer adds more risk. In the AI world, the chain starts with the core service OpenAI and its models.
Yeah.
But to actually deliver that service requires a massive ecosystem. You have the application layer, that's the user's app that calls the API. Then you have the API gateway, which is platform.openai.com. Below that, you have the analytics layer, which was Mixpanel. You've got the hosting infrastructure like AWS or Azure. You have authentication services like Okta. And then all these other specialized vendors handling billing, compliance, data processing.
It sounds like dozens, maybe hundreds of interconnected vendors.
It is. And the recursion part comes in because OpenAI isn't just trusting its first-degree vendors like Mixpanel. It has to implicitly trust the security of Mixpanel's vendors and then their vendors and so on down the line.
A chain of trust.
A chain of trust. And the attacker exploited a security gap at a seemingly peripheral link, like the cleaning service, if you will, but it was the one that happened to hold the sensitive user directory.
So even if OpenAI was perfectly secure on its own infrastructure, the entire stack can be compromised by a low-tech smishing attack aimed at one of those outer layers.
Absolutely. The reliance on all these third-party integrations dramatically widens the attack surface. As these AI providers scale up so quickly, they're pushing PII and usage patterns into these external vendor ecosystems to help them optimize. Every new API endpoint, every webhook, every third-party SDK is another potential point of failure.
Let's go back to that analogy to make the risk really clear. So you've built this high-security vault. That's the core AI models, the proprietary code. It's all safe inside. But to run the vault, you hire an external IT consultant, vendor A, to manage the database of who gets access.
Right. And then that consultant, vendor A, outsources its own employee monitoring to an HR system, vendor B.
And vendor B is the one who gets hit by the smishing text.
Exactly. The attacker doesn't even try to drill through the steel door of the vault. They just compromise the weakest human link in that long recursive chain. They get into vendor B, which gives them access to vendor A's systems, which then grants them the sensitive data that's flowing from the vault entrance.
So the vulnerability isn't in the AI code at all. It's in the web of business relationships you need to run a modern tech platform.
And this feeds right into that broader critique we mentioned about AI privacy. The core argument is that AI tools, because they're driven by data aggregation and optimization, they're just not built with privacy by design in mind. Data sharing is an operational feature, not an exception.
That's the key takeaway for privacy advocates. When you're prompted to accept the terms, you're basically signing a waiver that lets your metadata and usage patterns be shared with this whole host of partners who are optimized for growth hacking, not necessarily for maximum security.
That's right. This incident completely validates that concern. Is it some rare mistake? It's standard practice in the industry for things like funnel analysis, and it's something users probably never even considered when they signed up.
And for context, we should probably note that this isn't the first time OpenAI has been under this kind of security pressure. This is a pattern for high-value targets.
It is. We know from earlier reports that OpenAI has faced serious security challenges internally as well. Business Insider reported last year that a hacker got access to OpenAI's internal messaging systems and stole data related to their advanced AI tech. That tells you that sophisticated threat actors are constantly trying to breach their systems.
And that detail just underscores why the security of every single third-party vendor becomes exponentially more important. If your internal systems are under constant siege, any external data link becomes an easier way in. The Mixpanel breach shows that these third-party integrations are the easiest way for attackers to widen the target area and just completely circumvent the hard defenses around the core system. Okay, so in the wake of an incident like this, the response from the main company, OpenAI, and the vendor Mixpanel, it's judged not just on how effective it is, but on transparency and decisiveness. Let's look at OpenAI's actions first. The response was generally framed as pretty transparent and proactive, at least once they got the confirmed data.
Yeah, OpenAI's operational response after they received the data on November 25th was rapid. First, they immediately took the decisive step of just removing Mixpanel from all production services. Data flow stopped instantly.
Okay.
Second, they did a thorough internal review of the datasets to make sure they knew the exact scope. And third, they started the critical phase of notifying impacted organizations, administrators, and individual users directly, which they managed to do within 2 days of getting that data.
And the ultimate action, of course, was just terminating the contract.
Yes. They confirmed they terminated their use of Mixpanel entirely after their security review. And that sends a powerful signal to the entire vendor ecosystem. A failure to maintain security, even from a simple employee mistake, can cost you a very high-profile, very lucrative contract.
But I want to pressure test that phrase, generally transparent and proactive. Given how sensitive the data was waiting until November 25th, 3 weeks after the initial detection, was that really proactive enough?
That's where the legal necessity really clashes with customer expectation. OpenAI probably couldn't legally notify users until they had a definitive list of who was impacted and exactly what data was taken. But you could argue for more transparency during the investigation. Maybe a general alert to all API users saying, hey, a vendor was compromised, increase your vigilance. That 3-week gap really underscores the need for service contracts to include much faster data delivery and forensic cooperation mandates.
And speaking of cooperation, Mixpanel, as the source of the breach, had a pretty comprehensive response to the smishing attack itself. What did their internal remediation look like after they detected it on November 8th?
Mixpanel's remediation was extensive. They were focused on eradicating the threat and reinforcing their human defenses. They secured all the affected employee accounts and systems. They revoked all active sessions immediately. They rotated all the compromised credentials and blocked the malicious IP addresses.
So they locked it down.
They locked it down. And crucially, they acknowledged the human vulnerability by performing global password resets for all employees. Now, that indicates a high level of internal disruption, but it shows they took the smishing vector incredibly seriously. And of course, they brought in third-party forensics firms and law enforcement to investigate.
That level of internal lockdown suggests a strong commitment to recovery. But it brings up a question. Was OpenAI's decision to terminate the contract overkill? If Mixpanel contained the breach, rotated credentials, and fixed the vulnerability, couldn't OpenAI have just focused on improving the contractual security requirements instead of ripping out a whole analytics stack?
That's an excellent point, and it was a major discussion in the industry. Terminating a contract is a strong punitive measure. It sends a signal to the market, but it's rarely the most efficient path. I mean, the argument against it is that removing a deeply integrated analytics system causes huge operational disruption for OpenAI. They lose product insights, and now they have to spend months integrating and validating a replacement.
But the trust was broken.
But the trust was fundamentally broken. For a company like OpenAI, which is a custodian of some of the world's most sensitive IP, vendor security can't just be good. It has to be unimpeachable. The fact that a low-tech social engineering attack compromised their vendor and leaked their customers' PII, that likely crossed an unforgivable line. It sets a necessary and harsh precedent.
And regardless of the outcome, this whole incident sparked a huge discussion about what some people in the cybersecurity community were calling the accountability loophole of the decade.
That phrase just perfectly captures the feeling of helplessness that the end user experiences. The problem is that responsibility just keeps getting deflected down the chain. OpenAI, the data custodian, says, well, it wasn't a breach of our core systems, shifting the blame to Mixpanel.
Right, and then Mixpanel points at the attacker and says, we were the victim of a sophisticated social engineering attack.
Exactly. And the user, whose PII is now out there being used for spear phishing, is left asking, who is actually accountable for this failure?
And the answer is
The consensus, especially when you look at data privacy law and public trust, is that the primary accountability stays with the data custodian. It stays with OpenAI. If OpenAI chooses the vendor, and if OpenAI dictates what data that vendor gets, then they bear the final responsibility for ensuring that partner meets the security standard.
So this highlights the urgent need for better vendor security oversight. Not just checking for a SOC2 certificate, but doing continuous active auditing of your most critical vendors.
And the systemic change that came out of this within OpenAI seems to reflect that they accepted that responsibility. They moved beyond just firing Mixpanel.
Yeah, their public commitment was significant. They said they would conduct additional and expanded security reviews across their entire vendor ecosystem and would elevate security requirements for all partners. That shows the incident forced a systemic reevaluation of how they manage third-party risk.
It did.
This incident also provides the perfect case study for that philosophical shift we mentioned earlier, the adoption of data minimalism.
Data minimalism is the radical response to these recurring vendor breaches. And the core idea is to view data retention not as an asset to be exploited, but as a severe liability that you have to manage and minimize. The argument is powerfully simple. You can't leak what you don't hold. The safest database is the one you never built.
But there's a huge tension there, isn't there? Product teams rely heavily on PII names, emails, to track user journeys and calculate customer lifetime value. How does a big company like OpenAI balance robust product development with true data minimalism?
That is the trade-off. Engineering teams often default to collecting PII because it's just the easiest way to guarantee unique user identification. Adopting minimalism requires a huge engineering and organizational shift. It means you have to enforce the use of randomized, anonymized user IDs that are decoupled from PII in your analytics systems. It requires your legal and engineering teams to ask, before they deploy anything, is this PII strictly necessary for the function, or are we just collecting it because it's convenient for growth hacking?
And convenience usually wins.
Convenience often wins over true necessity. Data minimalism demands that companies challenge that default. It means viewing every single extra field of PII you collect as increasing your financial, reputational, and regulatory risk. It's a proactive shift.
So the goal isn't just to harden your own walls, but to stop bringing sensitive cargo to the periphery in the first place.
Precisely. If the analytics company had only received anonymized user IDs, the smishing attack would have been a contained security failure with zero customer PII impact. The breach would have been an internal embarrassment for them, not a high-impact customer notification event for OpenAI. #tagout-outro.
This deep dive has taken us through the entire chain of vulnerability, from a single text message all the way to a global security reckoning for one of the world's biggest AI companies. For you, the learner, this incident provides just indispensable insight into the real risks of our interconnected digital world.
So let's review the most critical takeaways for immediate action. First, remember the scope. The breach affected API users. The people on platform.openai.com thought ROM that's not the general ChatGPT users. Second, the risk isn't about lost passwords. It's about highly targeted phishing and social engineering attacks that leverage that exposed metadata, your name, your email, your location, and your organization identity.
And third, this whole incident is just a painful reminder that the security of any massive service depends on that peripheral link. Your company's security is only as strong as its weakest vendor, no matter how low-tech the attack might be.
And based on the recommendations from OpenAI and other experts, the actionable advice is all about vigilance and enhanced control.
You have to remain extremely vigilant for credible-looking phishing attempts, especially any that use specific details about your API account or your location. Double-check that any message claiming to be from OpenAI, especially if it has links or asks for information, comes from an absolutely official and verified OpenAI domain.
And remember the universal rule. OpenAI or any reputable company will never, ever ask for your credentials, your password, your API keys, your verification codes, through an unsolicited email, text, or chat. Any request like that is automatically suspicious. And finally, the single most robust security control you can implement right now to protect yourself is enabling multi-factor authentication, or MFA, on every single account you have, particularly your OpenAI developer account and any associated email accounts.
So what does this all mean for the future of AI development and security?
The Mixpanel incident, it really serves as this seismic, undeniable reminder that the rapid expansion of AI relies on these trusted, context-rich data layers, and that means security observability has to extend across every API, every webhook, and every single third-party integration you use to build those layers. As we move towards agentic AI, where models execute tasks on their own across multiple platforms, these tools will become even more interdependent, and that will widen the attack surface exponentially. So the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. If the future involves AI agents relying on trusted credentials to operate autonomously across different vendor platforms, how long will it be before we see an attack that doesn't just compromise user data via a smishing attack, but instead compromises the trust or the credentials shared between two AI agents across different vendors? That could create a cascading, autonomous supply chain vulnerability that is self-propagating. Securing the data flowing through the peripheral link is just the beginning. The real challenge will be securing the trust layer itself.